Davos, Switzerland. January 2025. Snow-covered mountains outside, absolute power inside. The most influential people on Earth gathered behind closed doors. Presidents, prime ministers, central bankers, billionaires who quietly shape the global economy. And during one session, a single statement cut through the room with almost no reaction. Gold is now the second largest currency in the world. Not the euro, not the yen, not crypto. Gold, no panic, no headlines, no emergency press conference, just silence. And that silence should have terrified you, because if you truly understand what that sentence means, you understand why markets are behaving strangely, why fear is bubbling under the surface, and why violent price swings, like gold and silver collapsing in a single day, are not accidents. They are symptoms, warnings, signals of stress inside a system that is no longer stable. While you were asleep, while you were watching shows, while timelines refreshed endlessly, the smartest money on the planet made a quiet shift. Central banks, sovereign wealth funds, institutions responsible for trillions of dollars. They looked at U.S. Treasury bonds and collectively stepped back, not dramatically, not publicly, just a quiet no. And in place of paper promises, they reached for metal. Ask yourself a simple question. Why would the architects of the financial system start abandoning its foundations? Here's the part nobody explains clearly. The rules that protected wealth for decades no longer apply. For generations, the formula was predictable. Governments issued debt, central banks absorbed it, investors trusted it, the U.S. borrowed cheaply, bondholders slept peacefully. Everyone believed the system was solid, but that structure cracked under its own weight, and the people at the top know it. At Davos, one seasoned investor explained the problem in brutally simple language. Debt is manageable when it's small compared to income. It becomes dangerous when it grows faster than the ability to service it. At first you adjust, then sacrifices begin. Eventually something snaps. This rule applies to families, companies, and nations alike. The United States is now carrying roughly $38 trillion in debt. The interest alone costs over $1 trillion every year. Not paying down the balance, just interest. More than education, more than national defense, over $3,000 per citizen annually, just to keep the machine running. No exit plan, no repayment schedule, just roll it forward and hope demand never disappears. But here's where the math turns ugly. Every dollar of government debt is someone else's asset. For every bond issued, a buyer must exist. Foreign governments, pension funds, insurance companies, your retirement account. Someone has to believe the promise will be honored. But what happens when buyers step back? What happens when supply explodes while demand fades? That's the pressure fracture spreading through the global system right now. Governments need to issue more debt than ever to fund deficits, while the world is already saturated with it. The simple question investors are asking is this: do I really want more? Increasingly, the answer is no. And there are two reasons, both unsettling. First, the returns no longer justify the risk. A treasury bond yielding 4% in a world where inflation runs close to that offers little real gain. After inflation, taxes, and currency risk, returns approach zero. Is that worth lending to a government drowning in debt and adding trillions more every year? For many institutions, the answer is obvious. Second, geopolitical reality changed the calculus. Trade disputes don't stay confined to tariffs. They evolve into financial weapons, sanctions, asset freezes, capital restrictions. If you are a nation holding reserves in US dollars, you must ask an uncomfortable question. What happens if access is cut off? This is no longer hypothetical. Countries have watched reserves become untouchable overnight. Ownership didn't matter. Jurisdiction did. That's why gold matters. It exists outside political systems. It cannot be frozen digitally. It cannot be sanctioned with paperwork. It doesn't depend on trust in another government's promise. It just sits there, heavy, neutral, and final. This explains why central banks aren't easing into gold purchases. They are moving aggressively. Month after month, treasuries are reduced and metal is accumulated. In 2025, gold surged dramatically, driven not by retail enthusiasm but by institutional demand. Thousands of tons moved quietly into vaults, and yet in the middle of this long-term shift, something else happens. Violent short-term moves, sudden collapses, single-day crashes, gold and silver plunging sharply, shocking anyone who thought prices only move in straight lines. These drops are not contradictions. They are pressure releases, forced liquidations, margin calls, moments when leverage snaps before the larger trend resumes. This is where people get confused and destroyed. Let me explain through a real story. Michael was 58 in 2020. An engineer, careful, methodical. Over 3 decades, he built nearly $900,000 in savings. He was 6 years from retirement and felt secure. His advisor placed most of his money into government bonds, safe, guaranteed, the foundation of every responsible portfolio. When warnings appeared about debt, money printing, and inflation, Michael ignored them. His advisor dismissed gold as fear-driven nonsense. Charts were shown, history was cited, bonds had always recovered. Michael trusted the system, then interest rates surged, bond prices collapsed. In less than 2 years, Michael lost nearly $270,000, not from speculation, from safety. He was told to wait it out. But time wasn't on his side. By 2024, his savings had fallen to roughly $630,000. Almost a third of his life's work evaporated. At the same time, gold, despite violent pullbacks, more than doubled over the broader cycle. I saw Michael recently. He's 64, still working. Not because he wants to, because he has to. His retirement plans are gone. His advisor remains unchanged. Same advice, same confidence. And this is where the story splits. Because while Michael trusted the old framework, others saw the shift happening in real time. They understood that volatility does not mean failure. It means transition. And that's what we need to talk about next. Now let's look at the people who didn't panic when prices crashed in a single day. The ones who understood that violent drops in gold and silver are not signs of weakness, but stress fractures in a system under pressure. I know a woman named Sarah. In 2021, she was 52 years old. A school teacher, not wealthy, just disciplined. She had saved about $450,000 for retirement. Her portfolio looked normal. Stocks, bonds, balanced, safe. But Sarah started paying attention to what central banks were doing, not what financial television was saying. She read about debt cycles, about currency debasement, about how money behaves near the end of long systems. When gold sold off sharply during temporary crashes, she didn't see failure. She saw forced selling, liquidity events. She asked her advisor about gold. He brushed it off. No yield, no income. Just fear, he said. Sarah ignored him. She moved roughly 15% of her portfolio into physical gold. Real metal, no leverage, no paper claims. Friends told her she was overreacting. Her advisor said she was making a mistake. She didn't argue. She acted. Between 2021 and early 2026, markets became unstable. Stocks moved sideways after inflation. Bonds suffered historic losses. And gold, despite terrifying single-day collapses, climbed dramatically over the full cycle. Every sharp drop shook out weak hands and over-leveraged traders. Every recovery rewarded patience. Sarah's gold position grew by roughly 2/3 over the period. That gain absorbed most of the losses elsewhere. While others panicked during crashes, she understood something critical. Gold is not a trade. It is protection. This is where most investors misunderstand gold completely. They expect it to behave calmly. But near the end of monetary cycles, nothing moves smoothly. When leverage builds, crashes become violent. Silver collapses harder. Gold drops suddenly. Then both recover. These moves scare people out at exactly the wrong time. Throughout history, money has taken only two forms: hard money and fiat money. Hard money is tied to something limited. Fiat money is backed by confidence alone. Both systems function until they don't. Under hard money, debt eventually forces a choice: honor the system and accept deflation, or break the link and inflate. Modern governments always choose inflation, always, because inflation is politically survivable, deflation is not. Once that choice is made, currency purchasing power erodes, slowly at first, then rapidly. And during that process, gold reasserts itself. Not smoothly, not quietly, but relentlessly. This is why gold's history is filled with crashes, followed by explosive gains. In the 1930s, it was revalued overnight. In the 1970s, it multiplied more than 20 times. In the 2000s, it surged again. And now, in a world drowning in debt, the same forces are at work. We've lived in a pure fiat system for more than 50 years. No anchor, no discipline, just endless liquidity to solve every problem. Every fiat system in history ends the same way. Currency weakens, trust erodes, real assets survive. That's why central banks now treat gold as a reserve again, not because it's perfect, because everything else is worse. Most people make a catastrophic error here. They interpret sharp drops as failure. They see an 8 or 20% single-day collapse and assume the story is over. In reality, those moves are usually liquidation events, funds selling what they can, not what they want. Gold gets sold because it's liquid, not because it's unwanted. Strategic investors understand this. They don't chase prices. They don't trade headlines. They allocate. A long-term allocation to gold means holding a portion of wealth outside the financial system. Historically, that allocation ranges between 5 and 15%. Not a bet, not a gamble. Insurance. And yet, most investors hold zero, no protection. fully exposed to stocks, bonds, and currencies that all depend on the same fragile system. When pressure increases, everything falls together. Michael had no protection. Sarah did. Now consider where we are today. Debt is expanding faster than growth. Central banks are trapped. Geopolitical tensions are rising. Financial systems are being weaponized. These are not normal conditions. These are late cycle conditions. That's why gold and silver experience violent swings. The system is under strain. Liquidity disappears suddenly. Leverage breaks. Then the long-term trend reasserts itself. Gold also carries something few assets do: minimal counterparty risk. It is not a promise. It does not depend on someone else's performance. Stocks can be nationalized. Bonds can default. Property rights can be changed. Gold simply exists. That's why it survives wars, revolutions, and collapses. An ounce of gold bought real goods centuries ago. It still does today. Every fiat currency in history eventually failed. Gold remains. So what matters now is not whether gold or silver fall in a single session. What matters is positioning. First, calculate 5 to 15% of your investable assets. That's your baseline defense. Second, focus on physical ownership, not leveraged products. Third, store it where you control access. Fourth, ignore the noise. Volatility is not your enemy. Lack of preparation is. And if you believe we are deeper into this cycle than most realize, increasing that allocation makes sense. Central banks already have. They don't panic during crashes. They accumulate. Here's what happens next for most people. They nod, they agree, then they wait. Until the next shock, until access disappears, until prices gap higher and metal is unavailable. Violent drops shake confidence. Explosive rallies remove opportunity. Don't be Michael. Don't confuse volatility with failure. Be Sarah. Understand the cycle. Act before fear turns into regret. The institutions already chose their side. The system already showed its stress. Now the decision is yours.